I think we are almost on the time to let's say invite our second speaker, Mr. John Arthur himself. John, how are you doing? Maybe you'll have to unmute yourself, John.
How about that? Is that better?
Yes, that's perfect. How are you doing? You look completely new today, John.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Like a brand new day. I've taken a shower, and other than my nappy hair that I haven't cut in 3 months.
How have you been? How is this shelter in place treating you?
Pretty well. I mean, it's we live quite a ways out from Raleigh on purpose, and we live on some acreage, and my wife and I both grew up in more of a rural area, so we're kind of self-reliant people anyway. So there have been a few surprises, but a lot of it's business as usual. But probably the biggest difference is I'm home all the time now instead of traveling quite a bit. So I'm not sure if everybody would agree, but I enjoy it. Maybe the family wishes at times I would get on a plane and go somewhere for a few days. But no, it's been good family time and be at home and not have to worry about, picking up food on the way home and other things that we normally do, and just kind of focus on what it is that we enjoy the most, which is each other.
Yes, awesome. And so I think right now of all the rages, I think the trampolines are flying off the shelf and other things too. One thing people are investing right now, at least on the Western coast, if not the Midwest, is installing their own chicken coops because people want to be a little bit more self-reliant. I do my own backyard vegetable box gardening, so I have a decent small whatever I could squeeze into my backyard as such. So do you have chickens coops in your property, or do you have any animals and all those things?
Well, we have rabbits, but those are more pets than they are for food.
And I think they breed pretty fast, so if you want to have them as harvesting material, I think that would be a pretty fast model too.
Well, they're both males and they're both had some parts removed. So if they do reproduce, we may have to do some investigating.
Yeah.
But we do, interestingly, so I grew up, in a farm area, and my world is about things agriculture in a lot of ways. And I was a member of the FFA, the National FFA organization, which was formerly known as the Future Farmers of America. So both of my girls are FFA members as well. And so this gives us an opportunity. And we actually did for one of their agricultural experiences as part of the FFA program and the ag education program.
Wow. What is the name again? FFA?
FFA was started in 1928. It stood for Future Farmers of America.
Future Farmers of America.
In the late 80s, they changed the name to the National FFA organization to expand their reach quite a bit. And instead of just being about farming, it was about all sorts of things related to agriculture, agri-science, agribusiness, and so forth. So it's a lot larger organization now than it was even when I was in school.
That's pretty interesting. Me and my entire family, my 2 kids, we love vegetable gardening, and I love to do that. Even though we are in Michigan, we only get a small span of growing them, but we do all the saplings and seedlings inside the house and then regrow those. I was not aware of this, and maybe me and my elder kiddo, we should look into it, because we both love Boy Scouts of America. So he is there, and I enjoy being with him as a dad, what I missed when I was young as such. So through him or the kids, I can do that. So thanks for that link.
I'm happy to help you out if you're interested. I'm fortunate enough to lead John Deere's FFA alumni and supporters group. So I have lots of information and lots of contacts there. I can help you out.
Awesome. Thanks, Lanaya, for putting the link out there in the chat. National FFA organization. I will have a look, and maybe I can get advice from you how to get me and my kids involved, because apart from planning for an apocalypse, it's just great to invest. And I would let you on a secret. I think my company designers knew about this. My kids, when they were young, 3 or 4, since then I have been doing that, and I plan the entire boxes in their name and say, okay, Arjun, this is your box. Juhi, this is your box. And then they have to weed them and water them, and whatever grows out of them, they love to eat. So the thing is, even though after 60-65 days, the tomatoes will come, I will just buy tomatoes from the market and say, these came from your patch, eat them. And they ate cucumbers and tomatoes and all the things that came from their patch. And somehow people are still wondering, like, how do you make your kids to eat veggies? Because they grow them, or they grow them. So Eventually they will know what I did with them. So, but that's pretty interesting. So it's nice to see about the fun elements that you do, but we will go into the presentation and talk more about the world we will be planning to. But anything else you do for fun? How do you keep yourself active on the weekends apart from the things that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think my wife thinks I have too many hobbies, because I do, and they all involve somehow expensive kit. I'm not sure how that happens, but like Keith, play guitar and ukulele and some other things like that. That's come out more now that quarantined a little bit more, but hiking and kayaking and boating and all sorts of things outdoors. I do wilderness camping and things like that, which may be in jeopardy this year, but try to just get outdoors a little bit more and enjoy the space. And we kind of naturally socially distance anyway, so those activities lend itself to it. So it didn't really cramp our style a whole lot.
So that's pretty interesting. That's pretty interesting. Awesome. Should we start? Let's say our discussion. Do you want to share your screen and go through a few slides, and then we can again jump back into the discussion?
Yeah, I can share what I've got, and we can talk through it. Hopefully you can see the screen now.
See your screen. And you have to help me here, John, not only me, but the entire audience. I barely can speak English after so many years. Please explain the thought behind this, and then we can start. I can't even dare to pronounce it. Don't even ask me to pronounce it.
Yeah, well, I'm going to pronounce it with a southern accent, I'm sure, but it'll be close. But Aegrescit Medendo is Latin, and I'm not much of a student of Latin, although I know a few things like e pluribus unum and a few things like that. But it essentially came originally from, I think, the 19 BC or something like that, from the poet Virgil. It's from the Aeneid, and in the poem toward the end, he talks a little bit about the cure worsening the problem. And as I got to thinking about some of the things that we deal with on a daily basis when we start to think about design and thinking about development, we are prone sometimes to rushing to a solution, and that sometimes worsens the problem. Recently, with the COVID thing, it was, you've kind of heard it quoted more as the cure is worse than the problem. And that's sometimes how this is misquoted, but both of those definitions are in play today as we talk through this. So both making a worse problem or worsening the problem that you started is kind of the theme here. So as we go through this, let me see if I can make it move.
Yep.
There we go. So I guess you would call it fortunate. My oldest daughter and I share a birthday. She turned 15 not long ago, and I turned something more than 15 not long ago. So we both enjoy pizza, and we enjoy this particular pizza place. As you can see here, the name of the company is Pizza Place. And so we ordered our pizza. We met there. My wife brought the kids over, and we met there after work one day, and we went to the pizza place, and we got our cups. We ordered our pizza. We went to the drink machine, and staring me right in the face was this sign that said "Straws suck," and they had a big stack of these, plastic lids that were sitting there. And I got to thinking about, that's an odd thing, and I knew that there's this brewing war on straws that has been going on, as my daughters have informed me. And so I read at the bottom there where it's circled, it says, "We're committed to making intelligent choices for our pizzas, people, and planet." I thought, okay, so how does getting rid of a straw necessarily help the planet, help people and the planet? And particularly, how does replacing it with a lid if perhaps plastic is the problem? So it kind of got me to thinking a little bit. And I think you and I had discussed this one time a while back, but it looks like the origins, a lot of this come from this particular video that became viral. It came out a few years ago, and it's a pretty gruesome video. I mean, it's not probably R-rated, but PG-13 rated perhaps. But it's a video essentially that many people have probably seen, where this turtle is captured, picked up out of the ocean, and it's found to have this plastic straw in its nostril, and they, through a little bit of agony on the turtle's part and probably on the human's part as well, they finally get the straw out of the turtle's nostril, and you can see kind of the blood and gore there. So from that, it that emotionally charged video kind of leads to, how do we eliminate straws? Because we can't have straws in turtles' nostrils, which I don't think anybody would disagree with. And so in the rush to that and the rush of judgment on plastic straws, you come up with at least one of the solutions, which is a plastic lid. And so, you get to thinking about, so what are some of the facts around straws and plastic cups and the use of plastic and those things? So one of the facts is that straws actually contain 3 grams of plastic. So they certainly contribute to some of the waste that we see in the oceans that can lead to the type of video that we saw. But straws really are only 0.2% of the total plastic pollution in the ocean. So not that it's insignificant, but it's relatively small in terms of the total amount of plastic that's there. And then also the cup itself contains 14 grams of plastic. So perhaps we got rid of a 3-gram piece of the problem, but now we've got cups. Now cups certainly can't get lodged in a turtle's nostril, but we know that they cause other problems as well. And then the other fact that was very interesting to me was that the lid itself actually contains 4 grams of plastic. So it's got even more plastic than the straw that it's intended to replace as well. So the question then became for me is, are we worsening the problem? Is the cure worse than the problem, or does the cure actually worsen the problem? And in fact, I think it probably does, right? And again, in our emotionally charged haste sometimes to solve problems, whether that's internal pressure for a schedule or an internal problem maybe that's happening at a factory or some sales team or a product, a lot of times we kind of rush to those emotional decisions that lead us to making some hasty decisions about what the solution perhaps could be. And so I want to introduce this concept of abstract laddering of abstraction, or abstraction laddering. And one of the things that I wanted to show here is just this little piece of it, but you can kind of see how we demonize straws. So we start asking the question, how, really quickly in this problem, right? How do we prevent this from happening? How do we prevent straws in turtles' nostrils? And ultimately, how do we eliminate straws was the solution that was kind of focused on. So then you can easily see how if the goal is to eliminate straws, then you might answer that question by saying, well, we need to provide alternatives to plastic straws. And then how might we do that would be, well, we can provide plastic cup lids. But we lost sight through that process of really what was the greater problem. We asked the question how, which gets us to more concrete toward the solution, more specific solution as we move down. And so that's typically the way that I think the human brain works. It really thinks about those things as something to solve and then immediately rushes to that solution. So at any point here, we could have asked the question, and probably should have asked the question, why do we want to solve this problem? Why plastic cup lids? That would lead to then, well, we wanted to provide alternatives. Well, why alternatives? We wanted to reduce the use of straws. And as we continue to move up, we want to reduce the plastic waste in oceans because we want to prevent not just the harm to sea turtles through plastic being shoved in their nostrils, but also other types of harm potentially. And then ultimately we want to maintain the health of the oceans, and you could keep going higher if you wanted to. But if we started at a much higher spot here, it's highly unlikely that a plastic lid would have been seen as maybe a potential viable solution for that. So after we've kind of thought about the why question, moving up and understanding the problem a little more holistically and maybe at a higher level, we should start to ask the question what. So we've asked why, now let's ask what. What about these problems do we know? What about these potential solutions do we know? And again, some of these things you can see the part of the Pacific garbage patch, I think, that's shown here. There's lots of different types of plastic waste. Certainly straws are part of them, but they're a relatively small amount. We also know that plastic comes into the oceans from roughly about 1,000 rivers, or at least 80% of it does. So a large amount of plastic is coming in through people throwing things on properties and ditches and things, and then they eventually make their way into waterways and then into the ocean. We also know that plastic waste is harmful to marine life in many, many other ways. You can see the little 6-pack thing here that apparently got on the turtle as it was younger, and as it grew, it started to create some morphing problems here as the turtle got larger.
That looks literally, the visual looks so agonizing, right? Means,
yeah.
I think we had a movie, The Happy Feet, where they had showed this in a kind of a caricature I never knew this would actually be inspired from a real world kind of a scenario. That's looks
Yep.
really painful. If you don't mind, John, can you just go one slide behind?
Yeah, sure.
So I like this concept of abstraction laddering as such, but does it matter where we start in the abstraction ladder when we ask the question why?
Yeah, in fact, what I found is it really doesn't. I mean, obviously, the earlier when you start to think about a problem, maybe you have a team or you yourself or are starting to think about maybe a singular narrow solution. At any point, then it's okay to ask why and move up further to try to understand the context and maybe exactly why am I really trying to solve this problem? Is it the real problem? Is it the root problem? So even at the point that you've created a product, perhaps you can ask the question why. Now, obviously, if time and money has been spent, the further down you go, the harder it is to maybe unwind some teams. And particularly if you're making money on some of those things, sometimes it's harder to unwind yourself from it. But I think as Keith was mentioning, you think about, Bridgestone being in the tire business. Well, are they in the tire business or are they in the mobility business? And as you ask the question, why are we in the tire business, you'll eventually get to things like mobility. So not only from a product standpoint, but even just from a company strategy standpoint, this is a very useful process, I think, and it really doesn't matter, where you start. I think, companies like Kodak, had they asked what business are we in, they probably would have said the silver nitrate based film industry. But if they would answer that maybe as more as storing and viewing photos or things like that, they might have been able to move up market a little bit more up in terms of job and need.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So as we continue our fact finding, I mean, obviously this is a very short and somewhat simple explanation here, but you can start to see how many facts come into play and start to maybe get you a little bit more understanding about either the solution you've already chosen or the problem that you're trying to solve. And so at this point, you can start to ask the question how. We do want to ask the question how. We want to move from the abstract to the concrete because we want to solve the problem. And to do that, we have to move to more concrete, to the solution domain from the pure problem domain. What you would see here is that as you started with maybe maintain the health of the ocean or even preventing harm to sea turtles, you could have easily asked the question how and gotten to reducing the plastic, because plastic is a pretty large harm and provides a lot of opportunity for cleaning up the oceans and particularly harm sea turtles. But then, you might have gone down the path of, well, how do we remove the plastic that's already in the oceans? And how might we then create a straining system that would remove the plastic from the oceans? And then ultimately, how can we create this ultimate solution that's ocean powered or solar powered and things like that? In fact, that's kind of what the ocean cleanup did, was trying to understand how they could do that, how they could remove the plastic from the oceans. Interestingly, I think some people asked them why, and maybe they asked themselves why, and they started realizing that, we can clean up the plastic in the ocean, but we also need to turn off the valve to stop the plastic from coming in. And so as they started to ask those questions, whether it was through abstraction laddering or whether it was through just a natural tendency to start asking the question why, is okay, well, they move back up to, we want to reduce the plastic waste in the oceans. One way is to collect the plastic that's already there, but another way is to stop the flow of plastic from entering the ocean to begin with. And so then they started to move down that, asking how do we create a river straining system, and they ultimately came up with the interceptor that you see here, which is an automated solar powered collection of plastic waste. Interestingly too, both of these solutions actually work together as a system of solutions. So the total solution they've come up with both prevents or minimizes the amount of plastic that's getting into the ocean, but also as a way to collect the plastic that's already there. So these are obviously much different than a plastic lid. I just use these as examples because they were clever innovations, I think. But you could also come up with less high-tech things like just, why do we even drink out of straws anyway? Should we just stop using straws and drink out of the cup, or things like that? So there's lots of different ways. This is just a simple example, but ultimately as you move down in the how, you would come up with many different concepts for how you would solve a problem, and then you would start to make selections as you move down the ladder further.
Makes sense.
So here's a subject that's near and dear to my heart, since I work primarily for John Deere in the lawn and garden part of our business, and focused on turf and turf grass and and how to manage turf grass. And one of the things that we faced a lot is this very similar to straws, the demonizing of turf and the demonizing of lawn mowing machines. And there's no wonder why when you hear the noise of lawnmowers and you see images like this and things get put on the internet that, much like the turtle videos, start to make people start to hone in on the how pretty quickly. So why wouldn't we just eliminate lawnmowers? And if so, then how could we do that? How can we eliminate them and still, survive? And most people, I think that that's truly possible, and it probably is. And you can see how, again, if you start with how do we eliminate lawnmowers, you might answer that by saying, well, we could reduce turf grass. We don't need turf grass. We won't need lawnmowers. And then you might come up with a solution that's a turf carpet or a plastic carpet that could replicate turf in some way. And so you can easily see how you could rush to that. And you might think you're solving a problem, but perhaps you're not. So if we got back to answering the question why, so why do we want this AstroTurf or turf carpet anyway? Well, we wanted to reduce turf grass. Why do we want to do that? We wanted to reduce the number of lawnmowers. We wanted to reduce the greenhouse gases that they generate and the particulate and other things. We wanted to reduce global warming, and we wanted to create a sustainable environment. We can keep laddering up and start to ask that question, why? Now, again, I'm not really opposed to artificial turf. I don't want to give the impression that somehow I've got a war on artificial turf, but it has its place, right? So when you look at the facts behind the situation and you start to ask what, as you've moved up, we've asked why, and then as we think about all of those different layers of the problem, we ask the what question, and we find that natural turf actually has a lot of benefits. It filters and captures runoff. It reduces heat significantly and improves air quality. It sequesters quite a large amount of carbon dioxide. Even in its current state, it sequesters more in taking care of artificial turf than it is actually emitted by producing it if it's properly cared for. It generates oxygen, it supports biodiversity, and it controls soil erosion. And in fact, artificial turf doesn't do too many of those things. In fact, it worsens some of those things. It generates lots of heat. As anybody that's played on an artificial surface, soccer or football or things like that can attest to. And you can just see all of the kind of X marks over there. It does help control soil erosion, and it depends on how it's installed if it can actually capture and filter runoff as well.
That's a pretty interesting slide. I would never think about the lawn with all those kind of checklists, right? Means about supporting biodiversity. That's pretty interesting. Means I think I just love bird photography, and I use that as an element to raise the conservation efforts of backyard habitat. And in the backyard, apart from the fruit trees or plant trees or shrubberies, ornamental you can plant, a lawn always becomes a pretty important factor, and it really supports a lot of simplistic small insects and biodiversity. It's a pretty important thing in starting on those grassroots levels, pun intended, and then growing off to the entire elements as such. But I never looked at the other benefits of those. That really makes sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, you could take it to an extreme and say, well, let's cut down everything and plant the whole earth in turf. Well, that wouldn't really solve a problem either, right? The cure would worsen the disease as well there. But certainly turf managed properly can be integrated into a property in a way that helps solve a lot of these problems. So again, once we've kind of got to the top here or picked the problem and the area we want to start with, we would ask the question, how to move back down. And we would find that a couple of things. One is, okay, we want to do greenhouse gases that are generated by the current lawn mowing solutions. So we could say, well, how will we do that? We can reduce those emissions. We can then develop low emissions lawnmowers, and we can ultimately come up, just as an idea, solar power lawnmower or some other form of energy that maybe doesn't use fossil fuels, or we can, as the industry's done for years, reduce the emissions in gas-powered engines, for example. The other thing you might find is that another way is you could increase the actual carbon that's sequestered by turf. If that was an issue, you could actually, instead of reducing the amount of turf, you would actually want to perhaps increase the amount of properly managed turf. And how might you do that would be to prevent improperly managed turf, because we don't want people out spreading too much fertilizer or putting too much chemical or things on and having those things get into the waterways rather. And so you might come up with a lawn care app as an example that could help you manage the health and help you manage the turf in a proper way. So what's interesting is we started again with a solution that was basically, let's just get rid of turf. And we kind of forgot maybe why we wanted to get rid of turf to begin with, which was to get rid of lawnmowers and stop the greenhouse emissions. But in fact, adding turf and doing it in a responsible way may actually be a better solution to the real problem that we're trying to solve. So, maybe just in summary here, I think as designers, a lot of people understand that, the real core here is we got to, using design thinking principles, is we got to fall in love with the problem and not a solution or a technology. I think it's easy as engineers and developers and designers many times to not only rush to the solution, but fall in love with the technology. Hey, I'd love to work on this new technology, artificial intelligence or things like that. And those may come into play, but starting there usually doesn't lead us to perhaps the best solution. And so abstraction laddering is a pretty powerful tool that can help us focus, really understand the problem more fully, and maybe prevent us from rushing to solutions so much and perhaps winding up with the situation of actually the cure being worse or the cure worsening the problem. So again, starting with it's pretty simple, start with a stated problem or the product or the thing that you think you want to work on, and ask the question why to move up. You start to ask the what question to gain a lot of context. Now that may take a little bit of time. It could be a web crawl, or it could be lots of research that you would have to do to understand some of the what's around the problem as you defined it, but certainly asking what would be the next to really get a true holistic understanding surrounding the problem. And then ask the question how. So instead of rushing to it, ask the question how, and the goal would be to generate lots of options for lots of solutions that can then be evaluated against the problem and some of the metrics that were related. And then I found it useful too, as we've worked through the process of our developing products. Many times it's useful at times, whether that's working on a component or working on the project itself, to start to ask yourself, okay, why were we doing this to start with? And you'll find lots of times you got really narrowly focused on a lower level part of the problem and should have probably worked your way up a little bit. So hopefully that's helpful and helps understand a little bit of some of the things that I try to include in some of the teams that I work with. And we've seen lots of success from having teams kind of scratch their head a little bit and they come kicking and screaming a little bit, maybe sometimes at first, but when they see the power of it pretty quickly, they jump on board and they start to understand it and kind of create some disciples as we go forward in some of these design thinking methods.
That's pretty interesting, and again, thanks again for putting this together. And as we all know, we are in our houses and our rooms. We cannot hear the applause from the audience, but I am enjoying it. Means I like the way you started with the abstraction laddering, and even the examples from the simple thing as a plastic straw. Means it literally brought to mind another element of. By the way, how do you say that again? The title of the presentation, the Latin title?
Aegrescit Medendo.
Medendo. The first one will take time. Medendo. I think one of the prime thing over there was also the case of the Wonder Bread. So Wonder Bread, I think the company started somewhere in 1920s or 30s as such. And at that time, the industrialization was on. So the bread that you could get from everything was darkish brownish kind of a thing, and brown was not supposed to be that clean. So they started to come up with taking out the germ of the particle and making it all white. So they wanted to create a white bread, which signifies this purity and cleanliness as such. So that's how they started, and taking out this elements out from the kernel of the corn itself, or the grains itself. But eventually, after a few years, it was a staple diet, and it led to a couple of diseases. And on the hindsight, they found out that it led to, because they were extracting the real vitamins and the essential micronutrients from the kernel itself to take out, let's say, the darkened color and to make it more, let's say, white as such. So they were trying to solve the problem by making it look white, by taking out all essential things. So, and then they started to add back into it, but not in the color, in different, I would say, chemicals as such to further increase the solution. So exactly as the title goes, somehow they came up, it was not intentional, I would say, but it came up with a solution which was actually a more bigger problem than what itself it was. And then now eventually it got rectified after 50, 60 years as such. And now you can see more use of all wheat grains and multi-grains and all those elements as such. So sometimes you do not know if you want to solve something, you look at it in a myopic way, and you cannot see what are the unintended consequences of that good design, right? Because as you're saying, from your channel, it might look like a good design, a good solution, but from a different point of view, it might have some completely different domino effects that might just topple the entire thing. So I loved your element of abstraction laddering, and you're right. The problem can be not just the oceans, how you stop coming in through the rivers, and you control 80% of the rivers flowing in, you can control a lot of it.
Yeah.
You mentioned about, you showed the photographs of some of the lawn machines as such. The earlier one, which actually said ban lawn care, that's the name of a service, or that was just something that it's got added? Yeah, that one, yeah.
So I was just looking on the internet for some photos of some things, and I work with a lot of landscapers as part of my job as a segment manager. So I'd never seen this before, but when I came across it, I had to use it because it was interesting. At first, I was looking for smoggy posters or things that were advocating for banning lawn care. And I found this image in the Google search, I think it was. And it took me a minute to realize what it was saying. It's like, oh, this is the company's name, Ban Lawn Care. So maybe another example of Aegrescit Medendo, where somebody might, when they selected their brand, whether it was their name or whatever, didn't realize there might be some unintended consequences. Plastering this on the back of your trailer. So
that's pretty interesting search also. Find also over there. I just have some simple questions. Means I think my lawn is a Kentucky lawn or something.
Kentucky bluegrass, yeah.
Kentucky grass. Is that the most common one used in the entire Midwest?
Well, there's lots of different turf varieties and even sub varieties. Generally speaking, the U.S. and lots of countries that grow turf, but the U.S. in particular, has warm season and cool season grasses. And typically here in North Carolina is about the transition zone. So if you kind of draw, a line around 35 degrees north, you'll see that there will be a little bit of warm season and cool season grasses. As you move north, you'll see more cool season grasses, predominantly like Kentucky bluegrass. As you move south, you'll see things like Bermuda and Bahia and other grasses that are used as you move further and further south, St. Augustine and others. Typically, cool season grasses are a little more lush, but they don't repair as well. Most of them don't creep and grow kind of asexually by creeping. They usually grow by seeding. And then when you get to more repairable turfs, as you move to warm season, the centipedes and things like that start to grow and creep. So yeah, lots of different turf varieties that create lots of different interesting ways to take care of them, both from an agronomic standpoint as well as from a mowing standpoint.
I would never imagine, means I think as Keith was saying in the morning, means it's a complex system, and I would never think about the creeping of a grass versus the seeding of a grass. So which is better from, let's say, from the lawn sellers, creeping or seeding? They would try to sell more seeding, right?
From which perspective again?
From not from John Deere's perspective, but if I don't know, Monsanto, who creates the seeds or who sells the sod or the lawn, what do they prefer from their business model? More creepers or more seeders?
Yeah, I mean, so you got, sod farms that are in places like Florida and southern climates, Texas and places like that, where they harvest the sod in rolls. They take a small amount of the topsoil with it. And then, that gets rolled out. That's typically better for smaller properties, just simply because it's pretty labor intensive and obviously fairly expensive to ship. Seed is easier to move around, but then obviously you're trying to germinate it and it takes a little bit longer to go. On like NFL fields and things like that, you can take a really thick amount of sod and put it down and play on it almost immediately. Whereas, to seed that would take several months to get the roots, established in a way that they would actually hold into the soil.
So talking about,
I'm not sure if they have a preference over the other, but
no, I'm just curious because when you actually had the natural versus the artificial ones also, means there is so many all the tick marks were on the natural one, but I think in some use cases, artificial turf also would be more appropriate in some use cases, correct?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So like I said, I'm not really here to throw people that make artificial turf under the bus. It has its pros and cons, but it goes back to the abstraction ladder. And again, which problem are you trying to solve? If the problem you were trying to solve was to reduce runoff and sequester carbon and those kinds of things, then artificial turf probably isn't a very good solution for that. But if you want a very consistent playing surface, for example, for a football field or a soccer field or a cricket field or whatever it is, then that could be a good option. There's lots of reasons why artificial turf could be used, but it's probably not for the problem that we originally had talked about.
Yeah. And I know, John Deere, you are not into growing turfs, right? Means you're into the machines, right?
No,
You're not into, okay.
That's right.
So coming back to the equipment perspective, means I was going to set up this webinar on my backyard today, just to be out there because it's finally warm, actually too warm. But I did not because my neighbor, Chris, it's his day of lawn cutting and his lawn makes a lot of noise. It's not a John Deere lawn, thank God. But since everybody understands that on the weekend, we love to sit on the backyard and you want to go there with a nice cup of coffee or a nice chilled beer, and your neighbor, maybe not your problem with your distance from your neighbors, but over here in suburbia, somebody somewhere is obviously cutting a lawn. I know it's a pretty big pain point, but eventually coming back to a design house like you, are you going to solve it for the eternity, that sound problem, which is really bad?
Yeah, so it's interesting because a lot of it starts with who we target. Most of John Deere's customers are a little bit more of a rural skew, so they're typically a little further away from each other. But even in my neighborhood, which has relatively large lots, I've got a neighbor that doesn't have a muffler right now on his lawnmower, and you can tell when he starts to mow grass or even just hit rocks or things like that. You kind of hear it. But certainly, yeah, we hear complaints both from an operator standpoint and also a bystander standpoint. Related to the mowing, and certainly the engine creates part of the noise, but also the spinning blades and they're essentially big fans, right? They're making noise as well. So we do work quite a lot on trying to reduce the noise of the machines, and with new technologies coming on board, that's one of the problems we think we can address through some new technologies as we go forward, because it is certainly a complaint. And the more we get packed together, the more that's going to be an issue. In Europe, it's been a problem for years. So in a lot of ways, in many countries in Europe, they've just banned when you can mow your lawn, so that I guess everybody's doing it at the same time, or certainly it's at a less disturbing time. So some localities in the US have done that as well.
I like that. At least try to have some kind of an cordon where you can still have peace and quiet in the evening times. As such, every subdivision has a rule, but not every neighbor in the subdivision follows all the rules. But talking about Europe, that market, I think somehow we all understand the world of robotic lawn care now. It is a little bit more easier, I think, in the European context, where the sizes are a little bit smaller as compared to the US sizes. So how soon or how fast that might be a reality for a little bit bigger yards, 2, 3, 4, 5 acre yards, as such, is something in the robotics world going to help us all?
How many hours do you have?
I have plenty of hours, man. It's
okay.
So coffee, I mean,
just maybe in the most simplistic sense, there are quite a few robotic lawnmowers that are sold in Europe. In fact, we have one as well that we sell there, and it is quite a bit different because of some of the things we just talked about, the noise regulations and when you can mow grass. There's a very narrow window of when you can actually mow, and so certainly mow by making lots of noise. So this solves part of that problem because it is quite a bit of a silent solution to the problem. In fact, many times you can't, if you're standing near it, you can barely hear it running. And also, but the European lawns are maybe the size of rooms in some cases, right? Very small. So it certainly has application. And we've seen here where companies that have verdant roofs or interior courtyards or things like that, there are needs for that. Or if you've got a smaller property, we're seeing those start to take off here. But we have another substitute solution here, which is called landscape contractors. And so because labor rates are relatively inexpensive here compared to Europe, having somebody not only mow for you, but trim and pick up leaves and sticks and fertilize and spray chem and do all those other things, that's still a more popular solution here in the United States, whereas in Europe, that's pretty cost prohibitive just from the labor rates.
Yeah, talking about
That's my
labor.
simple answer to a very
No, no, no.
complicated thing.
It's. I understand. Means we cannot solve the world's biggest problems on a 45 minutes call or something. But just trying to understand what are the typical elements that you hang in front of you to eventually go and tackle them. Talking about the labor rates, and it would be my earnest plea, whether it is a crazy plea or what. This goes back 3-4 years ago when my kid was 7 years old as such. We were at an airport when we were traveling, and the customs officer at the airport asked my ID. I showed him the ID as such, and my driving license. And then my son was there with me. We were actually going to the I don't know, remember. We were going to the Smithsonian Museums in Washington, D.C. So he asked him, and young man, show me your driving license. And he was making fun with a 7-year-old kid. And he said, you obviously don't need a driving license because you don't drive. And there my son, means imagine, customs officer, I'm there, he's there with his couple of people in the back with Sten guns on them. And he says, no, I drive. And I was completely like flabbergasted, like what is he going to tell? Because my kids have no control of filter on them. And he was startled. He thought he was going to play fun with him. And my son was pretty serious. He said, no, I drive my dad's lawn mower. I have a driving lawn mower. And I was like, shut up. And that guy gave me a really hard eye that it's a 7-year-old. He's not supposed to drive. I said, yes, I will not. And he eventually went through. So I know there is a legal age when you can, or there might not be a legal age when you cannot have your kids drive your lawnmower, but why can't we design one so I can use some nice child labor in my house as early as possible? I'm being fixated.
Well, certainly my dad took advantage of me when I was a kid. He waited till I was 10 to let me mow the grass, which I don't condone, by the way. But he made me beg him to mow the grass. And then he finally said, okay, if I give you this job, it's yours for from now on, right? And I said, yeah, sure. And about 10 minutes into that, I realized that I'd been duped. I do not recommend that you let children mow grass with
I know you have to say that, but what I'm saying is nowadays with little bit of an robotic controls where we can at least design a robotic lawn mower which will not do something drastic if the kid goes beyond a geocache line, but the kid can still go and do all the things. I will be all in for that. It will be really helpful to see how they can add to the chores rather than just the laundry and all those things that they don't know better. They just have to keep on doing that. There are questions coming in. I can go and ask some of those questions also. Right now, Deb is asking, how is smart technology changing the design of your products? So again, smartness can mean plenty of things, but any elements that you want to share what's upcoming that you can share in public?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's no secret. We have a new CEO now, and John May and recently retired Sam Allen, who did a great job of getting us to where we are from 10 years ago. And John's really focused on this idea of a smart industrial. How do we become a smart industrial? So we know several companies that have done things like that to not only kind of hold on to the industrial aspect, but do it in a smart way. And so there's a lot of wrangling about what exactly that means, because it is it can be an ambiguous term. But if you look at just in general at John Deere, we've had a product called AutoTrack out for almost 15 years now. That's essentially, it allows you to robotize a tractor. So many of the tractors you see in the Midwest, Southeast, where there's large fields, when you see how straight the rows are, you're like, how'd they get the rows that straight? They're basically robot tractors that are running. The operator's still in the cab to oversee things, but including turns at the end of the row and things like that, they're pretty much running fully automated. So I think we've been on the journey to smart industrial for a long time. But another acquisition we made a few years ago was called Blue River Technologies, and their goal was to try to reduce the amount of chemical that was sprayed and then obviously runs off into streams. And so they're robotizing the process of removing weeds, and specifically in this case they're trying to reduce the amount of chemical that's used and spot spray it just on the plant that is unwanted, the weed. and leave lettuce or whatever they're spraying for alone. So there's lots of things that we're doing, construction and forestry, and also in the turf care part of our business that is taking advantage of a lot of these technologies, whether that's connectivity, AI and things like that, as well as robotics. So I think you'll see, like a lot of companies, as Keith mentioned, the next 10 or so years are going to be very transformative in that regard.
Especially with the DAS, the data, and using the data as a service elements also. Justin has a question about the abstraction laddering, about asking the question why. So posing the question why on an intricate, complex organism problem can be hard to extract tangible insights. So how do you manage that? Let me read the question as it is rather than me
Sure.
diluting it. What makes an abstraction laddering exercise the most effective? I can see posing the question why on an intricate, complex problem can be hard to extract on tangible insights. So that's pretty interesting the way to look at it. Means we can go on expanding the bubble to solve the things, but if the answer doesn't lie into your area of expertise, how do you solve it, or how do you bring in or do some acquisitions or something like that?
Yeah, so that's it's kind of where the art comes into it, right? Once you've done a few, and if you understand your project and generally what you're going or what your company's about, it can constrain some things in a way. But certainly, as you move your way up and you ask why, you can get larger and larger. And then maybe even more importantly is as you ask how to come back down, you can really start to have a lot of different legs on the bottom of it. Ultimately, if you get to the very top, you're going to get to happiness and bliss, or be at peace, or things like that. They're at the very top. But how is usually where I start to have that problem more than why. So why usually kind of keeps a fairly limited number. And when I ask how, then all of a sudden you can come up with lots of different ways how, because you can innovate, and you come into almost a virtually endless supply of how you could solve a problem, right? And then at some point, you still have these constraints that are called time. And as Keith mentioned, in the one slide he had, you got the design thinking principles and the design process, but you've also got the realities of the other internal forces that are trying to run the business. So that's where you just have to be a little bit intelligent. You kind of have to feel the team. I've done a couple of these recently as part of some of the design thinking work that I've led recently in the last 6 months or so. One team was willing and able to go much further, and the other team, it took a little more dentistry to maybe get them to go. So you kind of feel out the team a little bit too, and give them a taste, and you kind of work within the constraints you have. So, but certainly it's easy. It would be easy. I mean, you could take a certain problem and you could just do nothing for the rest of your career, but abstraction laddering on that one problem.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Means like talking about just the way even the evolution of lawn mowers has come along. Means I think, as I said, I was born in India. I started my work over there. Eventually came here 18 years ago. But in between, I went to a Tata company called Voltas, and they had an amazing lawn of all the places that I knew in India. And I had seen lawn machines over there. It was so difficult to see how those guys actually took care of the lawn. And then fast processing to today here right now, the way the machines have evolved, they're pretty comfortable, they're pretty ergonomic, they're pretty efficient. Means yeah, noise, we talked about those things, and the decibels are coming lower and lower, but overall the activity of taking care of your backyard means means between me, I hope my wife is not listening. She thinks when I go outside and take care of the lawn, I'm really working my ass off, but I know I'm just having my mice radio, I'm blasting my music, just taking 2 hours just to do a half an hour job. So somehow it's a good kind of I would say identity that I have created, that I take care of the entire outside of the house and all those things. And maybe she has some other secrets that she has inside the house that I don't know, but it has come a long way and it's pretty interesting. Yeah. By the way, I should let you know, when I talk about VBL, the visual brand language as such, I use John Deere example a lot. Means it's not just the yellow and the green or the looks of a vehicle, it's the entire integrated package of what you stand for, the durability, the performance, the power play, ergonomics, which is encapsulated into the visual brand language. But for going back to earlier Keith's element, of what is industrial design, and some people get pigeonholed by just the looks or industrial design. No, but then you have to still disintegrate or dissect them and let them know how that also is a part of the overarching promise and the claims that we have of this is what we stand for, right? Means I think, as you were saying, is we have to make sure that we are communicating the elements of what we want to communicate through the products, and that's what I think you and we all are doing as such. So uh, I think before we are on the top of the hour as such too, before I have to let you go, the similar questions I would be asking everybody since the start of the virtual design conversations. You have an awesome illustrious career. Means you started with Kubota, now we are more than 20 years in John Deere. You have seen this part of the world. Uh, we have many younger minds on our audience also. What might be some of your nuggets of wisdom that you want to pass on to them? Like, these are the four things that I gleaned from what I did in my life, and how they can understand them and how they can use it or make it more useful for them. Can you share some of your tricks, secrets, insights?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that maybe 20 or 30 years ago, my high school teachers would have been scared for somebody to ask me to give insights to the younger generation. But
You can't believe what my teacher back in India would be right now, rolling in his or her grave. Like, what? Jiva? No way. Don't worry. You are in a very, very good way that people would be really proud of you.
so I'm going to plug FFA again here, but not really intentionally, because it is something that I didn't realize, not only as part of the of where I grew up, but as part of the FFA. Their motto is learning to do, doing to learn, earning to live, and living to serve. And when I think about how I've tried to model myself after people that I've seen that I think are people that are worth being modeled after. Those traits are there, right? It's so, how do you learn to do? And I'm always a hands-on person. So how do you do to learn? So don't be afraid to jump in and get your hands dirty and make mistakes. That's how we all learn. And then earning to live, which means, hey, what I do hopefully has a value to society, and that the wage I get for that, or the other benefits I get for that, are warranted and deserved. And then finally, living to serve. I mean, ultimately, I think, having a servant's heart, whether that's being a manager and having kind of a servant leader mentality, or whether that's serving through charities or things like that, and just being able to give back, that's important. So, yeah, if you haven't seen it, look up the FFA model. That would be my advice, to study that and really understand it in detail, because I think it's a pretty good guide for life for lots of people.
I like that. Well, I should write it down. I will go to the website, the ffa.org, and look at it. It's pretty interesting to see about even the future of farming association. So have you seen the movie The Martian, and what they do as a future of farming out there in Mars and growing potato plants? Is that feasible? Do you think what do you think about that? Have you seen the movie?
I don't know. I work mostly on turf, so I'm not sure if we're going to put grass all over Mars
No,
anytime.
this was more. This was more into the world of the FFA things about what will be the future of farming. Yes, so that's pretty interesting. Awesome. Thank you again. Anything else that we should be asking you that I failed to ask you today before I have to let you go?
No, I appreciate it. Thanks to everybody for asking questions, and appreciate the opportunity to hopefully give back a little bit here. So if anybody has any questions, certainly look me up on LinkedIn or whatever. I'm happy to answer them going forward.
Awesome. Thank you.
So check out the FFA.
Yes, I will surely look into it. Means my kid's birthday is coming. Actually, it's going on to this coming week, and maybe we can find a membership or something to do it together. He loves backyard vegetable gardening, not farming as such, and I love it too. So that's pretty interesting. You said your eldest daughter and your birthday falls on the same day, so
yeah,
you just have an economical party within you, or you do a party twice back to back?
Well, it's evolved quite a bit. So both of my daughters are adopted, and my oldest daughter, she's 15 now. We adopted her when she was 10 months old from China. And I remember getting the call it's one of those things like, JFK assassination, 9/11. I can remember exactly where I was when I got the call from the adoption agency. And she mentioned that, September 18th is her birthday. And I thought, well, this just got mixed up. That's my birthday. And she goes, no, that's her birthday too. And I was like, wow. it's like a, you know, a sign from God. It's a miracle, right? And
That's
so I called my wife, who's, by the way, this is like a complete role reversal. Normally I'm the quantitative, linear thinking engineer, right? And I'm caught up into this emotional thing that's happened. And I explained to her, you know, here's all I know about it. And by the way, her birthday's the same as mine. And I'm like, what are the chances of that? And in
wow.
like complete role reversal, she says to me, I don't know, like maybe 1 in 365. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. You're killing my miracle right now, though. So let's not
No,
be too
it
quantitative.
is no. I think she's wrong. I'm sorry. It is 1 in 7.2 billion people.
There
It
you
has to
go.
be from that perspective, not
There
from
you go.
the number of days perspective. You are right. That's pretty amazing. Thanks for sharing that. And again, happy birthday to both of you. The birthday is coming pretty soon, and till that time, I think the COVID should be completely over. So, thank you
Yeah, we're
again,
gonna have some
John.
pizza and we're gonna get a bunch of plastic cups and plastic lids and have fun.
Yes, 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 you should. You should. Thank you again. Feel free to be on the panel and see and chime in if you want. If you want to unmute yourself or and video yourself, that would be great. But thank you once again. And we will be going to the next speaker pretty soon.